Hey all, this is Father Brett. I'm here sitting outside our little back patio at St. Genevieve. And, we're in a really weird space right now. There's almost nothing that's going on right now that's happening in our lives, happening in our homes, happening, out in the world, is what we're used to. It's very weird. And so, we have to adjust to a lot of new things. Adjust to your kids maybe being home more than you're used to. Adjust to not being able to see your family and your friends as much as you used to. I think that one of the most painful things that I've heard and seen on social media and other places expressed is the pain and the weirdness of adjusting to not being able to go to Mass. People hear all these express, it's so different and so difficult because I know I can't receive the Eucharist like I'm used to. I can't go to Mass like I used to. And it's a painful sentiment. And we can even think like, as some maybe have expressed as, I can't go to Mass. Does that mean that, I can't receive those graces, that I can't receive, that union with Christ that I want? Does that mean that God has abandoned me? Does that mean that the church has abandoned me? To those last two questions, I just want to say the answer is no. God has not abandoned you. The church has not abandoned you. But how are we supposed to make heads or tails of our lives how are we supposed to make heads or tails of our relationship with God when one of the greatest sources of that, of strength, of growth in that relationship is not really available to us in the way it used to be? What does it mean that, Mass's public celebration of the Mass is suspended for a time? Now, the first thing I want to say is that I use kind of the language I just said intentionally. The first thing I'll let you know is that Masses are not canceled. The public celebration of them has been suspended. As you've already experienced, this Sunday was the first Sunday where there was no public Masses, but all throughout, you go on social media, if you have even like 10 Catholic friends, you'll see them all posting and sharing all these different live feeds of the Mass going on in the parishes still. And maybe there are no people present, but the priests throughout the world, and I say this because I want to encourage you, that the priests throughout the world are still praying the Mass. They're still celebrating it. The Mass is still going on. It hasn't been canceled. The Mass is still with us, even though we can't be present at it like we used to, like you used to. Even though the priest is celebrating to an empty church, maybe. And I think that's important because it reminds us that God is still present in the world. God is still present in our lives. The fact that the Mass still continues and that myself and so many other priests continue throughout the world and throughout this country, and especially in this diocese, continue to celebrate the Mass should be a reminder to you every day that Christ is still present. Christ is still here with you. That Christ has not abandoned you. He's just present with you in a different way than maybe you're used to. And this gets into, I think, something that's been making its rounds around the social media and the different platforms, is then this idea of the act of spiritual communion. And we hear about it, we see the prayers, we see all these things about it, but what is it? And why is it important that we participate in it? St. Thomas is one of my favorite saints, St. Thomas Aquinas. And he's also considered by many one of the greatest theologians in the church. And one of the things that he says, he's talking about, whether or not there are more than one way to receive the sacrament of the Eucharist. And he talks about this spiritual way of receiving communion. And he even says that even those who cannot receive the sacrament physically, or as he call it, they receive it sacramentally, as in actually eat it or drink it, is that those people can still receive it spiritually. Is that those people can still receive the effects, the graces, especially that grace of communion with the Lord and with His church, spiritually. It's this great mystery that, even though there may be no one present at the Mass, is that when the priest celebrates the Mass, it's not just for him that those graces of the Eucharist, of receiving communion, come to, but that those graces can actually go out into the world. During the Mass, we pray not just for ourselves, but for others. We have intentions for the Mass. In the Eucharistic prayer, one of the Eucharistic prayers, it says that, remember, Lord, your servants and all gathered here whose faith and devotion are known to you. For them, we offer you the sacrifice of praise. Or they offer it for themselves. For them, or for those who offer it for themselves. As in a sense, like the priest is offering this sacrifice of the Eucharist not just for himself, who is present there, but also for those who are not present, those of us who are not able to be present. It's the reality that the graces of the Mass are not just contained in our churches, but they go out. They go out in order to bear fruit in the world. And in a special way, as we're entering to a very different time in our lives, where as we've experienced we're present virtually at Mass and not physically, is that those graces can go out to you. Is that those graces have the opportunity to come to you. And that's why we talk about this act of spiritual communion. This act of spiritual communion is a way in which we pray and we enter in with all those same affections, all those same feelings, all those same desires that we have when we go to Mass for receiving communion, for worshiping God in Holy Mass. We take all those desires, we stir them up within us, we kind of deepen them from the midst of our homes as we partake virtually in the Mass, or as we even think about the Mass. And through stirring up the desire and making that act of spiritual communion, through those prayers, we actually, in a very special way, receive those same graces, maybe not in the same way, but we receive graces of communion like we would if we received communion physically. It's a very interesting mystery that all the saints throughout many centuries in the church have said it's the benefits of that are so great. It's almost as if receiving communion actually. So in summary, what does it all mean for you? Well, first it means, number one, God hasn't abandoned you. The Mass is still with us, though in a different way. And number two is that you can still receive some of those graces. You can still draw closer to Christ in the Eucharist in this time, through the act of spiritual communion, through taking opportunities to go to church when you can, since we're still able, to go to church and pray, to deepen that desire for the Eucharist. There's still opportunities for you to receive those graces of communion in your own homes, through prayer and through participating virtually or through reading and through different prayers, to just participate in that act of communion. And so don't be scared, don't be afraid. God has not abandoned you. And God still desires to be in communion with you. God still desires to grow in that union with you. And so just trust in that. And from all of us here at St. Genevieve, I just say, God bless you and have a great day.